What does this John Deere dozer and a controlled burn fire have in common? Well, a lot more than you think. Hi, I'm Chad Booth. Welcome to the County Seat. Today on our show, we are going to talk about a new way of doing fire mitigation, resource protection, regeneration of vegetation, and habitat improvement. And it's all done with a new process called roller felling. We're going to teach you what that's about today and then have a discussion about it. Let's find out what this new process is. From a distance, roller felling looks like a forest version of Pac-Man or a scene from Stephen King's The Langoliers. But in reality, it might just be that missing link to much-needed forest management as an alternative to burning or as a cost-effective tool to keep controlled burns from becoming catastrophic ones. Mike Suppression, inventor of the 106 system, explains.
It's a 10,000-pound circular cylinder attached to 300 feet of winch cable, and we cut past about 200 to 300 feet apart depending on which application. Interestingly enough, I studied for days and days and found a 1950s Popular Mechanics magazine that had an article in it about some contractors at Hungry Horse Dam that were commissioned to clear 25,000 acres of trees to build the reservoir. What we've learned out of Popular Mechanics is leverage is your friend.
Unlike traditional chaining methods, the raised cable leaves sapling new growth intact while clearing larger, older, and diseased trees. And that's good news for aspen regeneration, which has many benefits over conifers for soil, water, and fire mitigation. The system can easily clear over 100 acres per day.
The technique we use is quick. It can change land mosaics in a day. People that see it obviously are kind of blown away by how quick it can change the land.
The results see rapid regrowth of aspen, which have been overrun through the years by conifer growth.
And this is one way that can clearly regenerate aspen. We've already seen that on the ground. Also, it could help us more effectively prep for prescribed fire by putting boundaries around the areas that we would like to burn.
Because we use GPS systems, so we design these ahead of time on a computer so we can go in and out of, we stay away from the drainages, make it rolling for the wildlife. And so anything your imagination can come up with, we can do. We have a proprietary computer software called Dozer Sync, and once you design it on a screen, it gets loaded into it, and the dozer operator sees it, follows the line. It's very simple, very safe. It is extremely flexible. Whatever a forester or land manager can think of, we can do. So we remove the beetle-kill trees or the poor forest areas, and then we go in and re-landscape it, almost like a landscaping crew.
It's all about trying to figure out how to do more work at scale, larger projects that really can make a difference on the landscape.
This needs to be done all over the western United States, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, now you know what the process is. Let's get started after this commercial break and knock down some of the issues in our roundtable discussion. Welcome back to the County Seat. We are having a conversation today about what has been dubbed in our working group, getting to this episode, mechanical fire. Joining us for the conversation is the founder of 106 Reforestation, Mike Suppression. We have Mike Fowkes from the DNR, Division of Wildlife Resources, the director there. And then we have Darren McAvoy, who's with USU and works as the forestry extension officer across the state. So I would like to just toss out this conversation with just a little bit of what inspired you to do this, because you are one of the most passionate people about what you do that I've met in 10 years of doing this show.
Well, thank you for the compliment, but, well, you know, everything's a transition. You know, you buy a ranch with some mismanaged forest on it, and you start doing everything you can to improve it. I was a wildlife guy. I was a big sportsman, but the more I got to see the land and the more people, everybody here today, I've known for years, which is interesting that you guys ended up being here as well, but have taught me a lot to put back into the forest what's ever been taken out. So I kind of like bettering the forest, the wildlife, and obviously aspen regeneration. And I found some ways that I think can be done more efficiently and stop catastrophic wildfires and benefit both wildlife and actually the forest itself. So it's just something I'm very passionate about.
Looking at it from your perspective, Darren, there are a lot of tools in the toolbox to manage forests and to keep the fuel load down, okay? And fire is one of them. You've got traditional chaining, you've got bull hogs, you've got this entire toolkit. How does this one stand apart in what Mike's doing?
Well, that's what we're here to study as USU. We're looking at this 106 pilot project to evaluate the restoration quality that's going on here. The reforestation, what trees will be coming back, how the aspen will do, and how we expect the fire behavior to change when a fire comes through after this treatment. So it's one more tool. Every tool that we can have is important. We need every tool in our toolbox. And from my perspective, we have a limited number of tools, and you've already mentioned most of them. So if we can have one more tool that's cost efficient and effective on the landscape, we all welcome that.
We are at the tail end of one of the worst fire years that California's ever seen. And well, we're seeing their bad fire year too, because the smoke has made it all the way back to the Midwest. And it's been pretty choky in the Wasatch Front valleys this year. But there's also been a lot of wildlife loss. So, Mike, with your basic understanding of what the other Mike is doing, how is this a better way to approach things than even, say, prescribed burns from a wildlife perspective? Is this a plus?
Yeah, I believe it is. I'm going to give you just a bit of history on the Watershed Restoration Initiative, and Tyler's going to talk some more about that a little bit later. But I was fortunate enough to be involved early on as a legislative liaison with Kevin Conway some 20 years ago, who was the instigator and founder of then the Habitat Restoration Initiative that's morphed into the watershed. And he had a vision of what this should look like, and we've been able to attain that vision. It took 20 years of hard work and coalition building and getting people and the science together to do the work. And we've done a lot of work on winter range for wildlife that benefits wildlife on winter range and transition range. But where we haven't done a whole lot of work, we need to start looking at how we can benefit wildlife is at this high elevation. And this process, I think, will help us do that.
Obviously, there are real serious watershed issues when you get fire, particularly a controlled burn that gets out of control, or a fire that just happens because of neglect of the forest. You know, is this a better answer, and what kind of impacts do you see?
Catastrophic fire is bad for wildlife. It's not only habitat destruction for wildlife, terrestrial wildlife, but then you get these flood events that completely wipe out our aquatic wildlife in those drainages. So if we can use some tools that can knock back catastrophic fire, we help wildlife.
I think the state legislature saw the opportunity here in funding 106 Reforestation and doing this project to, as we said before, add another tool to the toolbox. And I think everybody understands it's not going to replace fire. Fire is an important thing on the landscape that, like it or not, we're stuck with. We're going to have fire. This will help moderate fire, perhaps. That's one of the things we're here to study, to see how it affects fire in the future.
Mike, you have a theory about controlled burns and how your process can actually help ensure that they stay contained or controlled. And I was very fascinated when you mentioned it to me, and I'd like you to explain it for the audience.
Our plan and everything is done obviously through GPS systems, so we're not cutting rectangles in the forest. Everything we do has to look natural, and for the most part, everything we've ever done looks natural after it's done. But one of the things that we'd really like to be able to do is complement prescribed burns. For instance, I call it the fire pit kind of method, where if you're lighting a campfire, the fire is going to burn pretty hot in the middle, but if you put rocks around it, it has a tendency to not let it spread. We do the same thing with the forest, where we would go cut a ring around a certain section of beetle-kill pine trees, areas that need to be reestablished. If we cut a perimeter around it, obviously it's lower cost for the state, because we're treating less land to do that. And then after the fact, you can come in and do a prescribed burn in that area, and obviously bring the cost down and the risk of a prescribed burn. So complementing that, and I think overall it's best for the state, it's best for the taxpayer. But yeah, I have some theories about how to work on that, and I've learned it from people smarter than me, you know. How do you do that with a circle? And you burn it from the middle, start a heat going in the middle, and then it sucks everything in. So again, you reduce your risk. Can't wait to do it. I think we're going to do it sometime this year or next year. We're going to do a pilot on that. So
Chad, I'm the chair of the Utah Prescribed Fire Council, and as the Prescribed Fire Council also welcomes new tools to help us control fires in advance before we light them. I think it'd be important.
And that's a good question. How often in the last decade have they gotten out of hand?
Oh,
I mean, I
how
know a
often?
couple.
Less than 2%. The ones that do get out of hand can be troublesome, and we'd feel terrible for anybody who's lost life or property because of those out-of-hand fires. But we also understand that fires are going to happen anyway, and if we can get ahead of them and light the match under more preferable conditions, like after we have a foot of snow on the ground or a condition like that, as opposed to in the middle of summer, we might be able to do better.
Given the issue that's on everybody's mind right now of air quality because of this fire season, if you had an equal outcome of using this kind of treatment or a controlled fire, would you give this some extra value or weight it a little extra because it doesn't have that air quality impact to it?
I think there's places and times where it's going to rise above using fire as a more precise tool because of things like that, where we can't impact air quality. It's too close to a city or other issues like that. So I think it can help spread out some of those issues.
We're going to take a break here, and we will come back and continue our conversation on the county seat about 106 reforestation and this new way to look and add tools to the forest management toolbox. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the county seat. We're having a conversation today about roller felling, a relatively new, as far as our universe of forest management goes, process that's taking place in Utah. We want to focus this part of the conversation a little bit more about watershed impacts. Joining us for this part of the conversation in the center seat is Tyler Thompson, who is with the DNR, and he handles the Watershed Restoration Project. Tyler, thanks for sitting in.
You bet.
I do want to talk about what's behind you for a second, Tyler. There's a lot of conifer in this area that's just been cleaned. It being out of the ground and making way for aspen regeneration, how much impact is that going to have on the watershed?
Well, initially, you know, projects like this can look pretty ugly up front, and we fully acknowledge that. And initially, they can have a bit of a negative impact on watersheds. But what we're looking for is 10, 20 years down the line, after we've seen that revegetation event happen, after that aspen is resprouted. What we're really looking for in these forests is to help diversify these even-age stands. And what we see behind us and what 106 Reforestation has been able to provide for us is a different method to help with that diversification.
I'd like to add that as a forestry community, we've been putting out the call that we need to increase the pace and scale of treatment of wildlands in order to get ahead of wildfires. And Mike has listened to that and applied his knowledge and know-how to this problem. And this is the result, this 106 Reforestation. This is how we got here.
yeah, and I wanted to add to that, Darren, because you're right. I mean, part of this isn't going to be successful if it isn't scalable. I have to be able to provide the state and the forest an opportunity to do this at large scales quickly, because we don't have a lot of time. I mean, catastrophic wildfires cost a lot more money than what we're doing here. So that is extremely important to me. Probably my number one thing that I'm trying to accomplish is at a fast rate, is to make sure this is scalable obviously at a price that is budget friendly.
So, Tyler, you've done a lot of watershed restoration projects. We've even featured some of them on this show before. When we're looking at that and looking at the scale and what the residual is when they're done with the roller felling as opposed to other operations, how much of a role does this scalable?
The real value that we see of this this methodology is a complement to prescribed fire. We often talk about boxing and burning. And what I see this methodology doing, you know, a lot of folks don't understand that you just don't go out there and set the mountain on fire. There's years and years intentionally, yeah. There's years and years of mechanical treatment that goes into preparing for that fire, and a lot of that is preparing those edges and those boundaries so that we don't see a prescribed fire jump those lines and burn more than we'd like to see it. So to me, that's where we really see this methodology being scalable, is as part of a larger prescribed fire operation.
And I think, Mike, you said you can get into like a 45-degree angle as far as terrain is.
Get into a lot steeper, but let's go with 45.
Okay, well, just for purposes of an intellectual argument.
Correct.
All right, does that create some unique characteristics as far as managing some of these that maybe aren't available in some of the other tools in the toolbox?
Well, I'd like to respond by saying it creates an opportunity that we don't have otherwise. We're up here today in the Tavaputs Plateau, and my colleague with the Utah Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, who is authorizing and overseeing all this work, has been trying to entice a logger up onto this plateau on Mike's behalf to work on his property for more than 10 years without success. The road up here to Bruin Point is arguably one of the toughest roads in Utah. And I've driven most, I think, of the toughest roads in Utah, and it still gives me the willies driving up it in a pickup truck.
We'll compare notes after.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so enticing a log truck driver to want to bring a load down that is really difficult and dangerous. And so this 106 reforestation provides an opportunity to do things in forests that traditional logging and or prescribed fire won't work or is not cost effective. And this is where I see the biggest opportunity for this method.
So where do we go from here? You've got a pilot project, you've got a period of time that you're working on, you've got some results. To prove your point, Mike, what help do you need from the different divisions of the state?
Well, I've got their help over the last 10 years, so I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the people here. So obviously, you know, Utah State is studying what we're doing. They're coming into every one of our areas and making sure that they're understanding what the exact results will be in the future. I think it's a 2 or 3 year study.
Yeah, we have 2 master's students. We have 2 professors working on it, and master's students underneath each of them. Our forest ecology professor and silviculture professor, Justin DeRose, and our fire ecology professor, Larissa Yoakum, and each with a master's student who's focused on this. And we expect some short-term results in 1 to 2 years.
So if people want to understand a little bit more about our forests and forest management, how do they do that?
I'm glad you asked. So I host a website, forestry.usu.edu, and we have hundreds of pages of information there and pre-recorded presentations. But what's normally a face-to-face event, I host an annual timber harvesting and forestry practices tour. I also host an annual wildland fire tour. This year we're combining them into one virtual event, and that will be on October 22nd this year, and we're going to look at the 106 reforestation method during that 1-hour event. And it's tied in with Utah Forest Stewardship Coordinating Committee. That's the group that steers private forestry in Utah. So that's our intention, to host an online presentation that will teach people about what we're doing here.
What are you hoping for as a result of this? If these studies prove beneficial and Mike can prove this scalable, what do you see in the future of watershed restoration and forest management?
Well, from the perspective of the Watershed Restoration Initiative, as well as the Shared Stewardship Program that's just come online in the last few years, the real bottleneck is funding. We have more NEPA-ready, shovel-ready projects that could start next year than we have funding for, probably twice as many projects than we actually have funding for. So getting methodologies and getting new contractors involved, like Mike has talked about, that's what we're looking for. We really need to ramp up in this state, and that's what we're hoping to do.
Do you think your technology is going to get more attention out of the legislature, saying, okay, I can see how this all fits in the big picture, let's put more resource towards it?
Absolutely, that's the goal. I mean, it received some attention to get me here. So obviously that is the goal, is to get there to the point where our solution, you asked me a question earlier, and I'll change gears a little bit. What can I ask from these guys? Obviously, Darren's department's already given me everything that I need to know that's going to be invaluable. From Tyler's standpoint, I need to know where we need to be, cost-wise, method-wise, process-wise, so I can get there. I mean, Tyler knows exactly where we need to be to get this so that the funding isn't such an issue. That is where, if I can prove to the departments that what I'm doing is far more cost-effective, because it all comes down to dollars, right? I mean, if we had $1 billion, we could treat a lot of stuff. We don't have it, so.
Well, I've got to say, I'm very impressed with the entrepreneurial spirit with which you've approached a large bureaucratic problem, and I commend you for it. I commend the state and the agencies and the people for being receptive, because very often it's like a little series of fiefdoms, and somebody say, well, we've always done it this way, why would we look at something different? So folks at home, please check this out in a little bit more detail, study up on it. If you're a member of the legislature, pay attention to this, because everybody that's here on this location today truly believes that there is some real opportunity here to change the landscape of forest management, so to speak. Remember, local issues are where your life happens, are the most important to you, whether it's the view out your window of the mountainsides or the quality of the water that comes out of your tap. So be involved, be part of the process. We'll see you next week on The County Seat. Thank you for watching The County Seat. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications to keep up to date on the program and happenings around Utah.